Cambridge can be crap, it can be awful, it can be terrible, and I'm gonna tell you why. Hi, welcome back to my channel. It's been a little while since I've done a relatively serious video with me just talking. I'm back, and that's what we're doing today. I've been making videos about Cambridge for a little while. I always said I wasn't going to be like one of those Cambridge YouTubers, right? And there is a reason for that. A lot of these studying with me kind of videos and go about my day in the life of a Cambridge student videos, whatever, I find boring. That's just a personal thing. You can enjoy them if you want. Another one of my issues with it is that I find it repetitive. A lot of people make the same kind of content and I find that dull. Again, if you want to watch it, you want to make it, all power to you, enjoy. The third thing though, which I think is going to be the topic of this video, is that it paints Oxbridge in a really rose-tinted way. Oxbridge, like it often is sort of seen as this amazing goal that people work really hard towards and then eventually get there and just live the dream. They work really, really hard, then everything else they do is incredibly glamorous and it's just inspirational and everybody should look up to Oxbridge students. That's the kind of impression that I get from those kind of videos. Day in the life videos, the like study with me videos, the I got into Cambridge videos, and there's like a joy to all of them and there's a value to all of them, and I understand why lots of people like them, but there isn't that much balance I find on YouTube of what Cambridge is actually like, what it's actually like to go there. And I say Cambridge as someone that went to Cambridge, not Oxford, so I can't speak for Oxford students, but as someone who went to Cambridge and recently graduated, I think it would be a mistake for me to make videos about Cambridge and not also put across a more balanced viewpoint of what it's actually like to go there. What can it be like? And let me tell you, Cambridge can suck. Cambridge can be crap, it can be awful, it can be terrible, and I'm gonna tell you why. I don't want this video to be me telling you not to go to Oxbridge. The general message of the ones I've made before are go if you want to, if you can. And I'm so grateful that I went. I'm so pleased with how things turned out. I got my little first. I did well, and towards the end of my degree I really, really enjoyed it. I loved what I did. I loved my history degree. I made great friends and overall my experience was a positive one. But it wasn't completely a positive one, and there were lots of it which were rubbish. And you deserve to know about all the rubbish that can happen when you go to Oxbridge rather than just the good bits. And I feel like on YouTube, people like to say just the good bits. It's another one of these kind of Instagram filters where you scroll down and it's just people telling you how wonderful and amazing it is. And it can be that. It can be wonderful and amazing. But it can also be rubbish. And actually, a lot of my first year was pretty rubbish for a lot of reasons. And there were lots of times throughout my degree that it was not fun. Listen, you deserve to know the good bits and the bad bits. So if you decide to apply to Cambridge, if you decide to apply to Oxford, you have the information, all the information that I feel like I can give you to make a fair decision about whether it's right for you, because it might not be. There are disadvantages to going there, and it needs to be a serious decision rather than just, oh, that would be good, let's go there. I've said in one of my other videos that I didn't really have an idea of what Cambridge was going to be like before I went there. And I didn't. I think that's true for a lot of people. You just imagine it as the goal, the thing that you want, and then you get it, and then you celebrate. But one thing I did kind of know about was that the workload was a lot. And so when the workload did end up being a lot, I made a decision that I was going to prioritise my work above everything else. In my first year. My first term really. I decided I could make friends later. There was always more time to go out and go to clubs or like whatever, meet people. What should be my priority was I needed to get a grips on work because it felt impossible. It felt so overwhelming and I needed to be able to feel like I could do it before I turned to other things and before I got more of a balance. Which meant that the first term of my Cambridge experience was largely spent in my room by myself trying to do work and procrastinating loads, and I got into really bad cycles of getting up really late, procrastinating, realising it was like 2 p.m. and I hadn't done anything, and then freaking out, and then doing work and not really doing work that I thought was good enough, and then spending the next day exactly the same because I felt like I had to just be in my room just working, which is definitely not the case and not something I should have done. It's stupid. Well, it's not stupid. I understand why I did it. I think it's the sort of thing that can happen when you have all this pressure, when you realise I am at one of the top universities in the world and I don't feel like I'm good enough to be here, so I feel like I need to work doubly hard as everyone else around me just in order to keep up. That is classic imposter syndrome. I didn't really recognise that it was imposter syndrome at that point. I just thought it was realistic. At that point I thought, I got into Cambridge because I'm clever. Sure, yeah, I know I'm clever, but everyone else around me is really, really clever and I need to keep up. Like, I can't afford to just be around friends all the time. I need to work, like, as much as possible. But the thing is, when you make that decision and you decide that you're just going to stay in your room, you don't become productive because you don't have balance. So the work that you do is really inefficient, and I ended up procrastinating so much and wasting so much time just by myself. Whereas what I found in my second year was that when you take the time to have routine, to have balance, and to build socialising into your routine, you will find time to do your work anyway. Cambridge work seems to sort of fill up whatever time you give it. So if you decide that you're gonna do work in those hours, and that seems about right, then you can have the rest of the time to do what you want. But if you decide that you are just going to do work, and when the work is done, then you'll do other things, you will just work. You will spend your entire time either working or procrastinating and feeling guilty because you're not working. And you're not going to get more done. You're just going to do less stuff. The workload is never ending. You never finish. I've been asked to do videos on history, on the history course before, but I'm not going to because they're changing the whole course, so it would be completely irrelevant. Everything I tell you about what my degree was like, the structure and the papers and things, that's changing, so I'm not going to do that. But basically, in the first 2 years of my degree, I had a weekly routine where I would be set an essay to write with a reading list. I'd read as much as I possibly could. I would plan and I would write my essay and then send it in, and the next day I'd have a supervision. So you could say, well, your work is finished when you've written the essay, but it's not. It's not finished then, because the essay is never good enough because you've only done it in a week. You haven't had enough time to make it perfect. And the supervision is about, in history degrees, the supervisions are often one-to-one, your supervisor telling you what you could have done better, how you could improve your essay, and what you need to do now, or when you're revising and preparing for your exams, in order to improve your knowledge of that topic. So your essay isn't the finished article. It's not meant to be. Also, because you've been given this enormous reading list with an impossible amount of things on, you never read enough. And when I say reading, I don't mean like reading the entire thing, I mean like using that source as a source to get information from it, to use in your essay and your learning. In my first term, I think I averaged about 5 to 7 items on the reading list per week. In my second term, I think I got through about 9 or 10 a week, and in my third term I think I was averaging between 10 and 15 a week. You can't ever say that you've done, because if you've got more time then there's always more to read, there's always more to do, and there are other papers you can look at, and that's going to become more of a thing with a history degree because the structure's changing, but there's always more that you could do. So trying to just do the work well first is not going to work. It's a losing game. You're not going to be able to, because your standards just go up as you can do more. So it's better to just try and build in balance and do as much as you can. It was only in my second year when I started having actual balance and routine that my work started being on time. I think one of the other things that I'm sort of touching on here that I haven't explicitly said yet is that if you're doing a humanities degree at Oxbridge, you're largely left to your own devices. Well, you're not largely left to your own devices. At other universities you would be more. The thing with Oxbridge is you have supervisions. So you do have 1-to-1 or 1-to-2 or small groups, whatever, with professors or academics regularly every week. So to an extent you're not left to your own devices. But you do have to organise your time more than you do elsewhere, because elsewhere you're more reliant on lectures. They're the main way you learn. You have to go to your lectures. Your lectures are how you get taught, that's your main thing. Whereas at Cambridge, if you're doing history, and this is just specific to history, your lectures don't really matter. In my first year, I began by going to all of my lectures. I think by the end of my second year, I was going to barely any. They mattered way more in my part 2 when it was more, they were more specific and I found them more helpful. But your main learning in a history degree for Cambridge comes from your reading. And it doesn't have to be, if you find lectures useful, go to them and whatever. The main part of your week is just spent by yourself reading, deciding what you want to read, reading what you want to read, and trying to piece together an essay. So you're sort of left to your own devices, and if you're not good at planning your own time, that might be a problem for you. It kind of was a problem for me in my first year. It was less of a problem in my second year when I had more people around me. Basically, in my second year, not only was I less of a mess, just in general, personally, I was sharing a set. So a set in Queen's accommodation, it means a set of rooms. So I kind of had a roommate, but I had my own room. That's what that means. And our hallway was just way more communal as well. So I was around people way more. I had more of a routine. I was just more of a functional human being. So I did better. I coped better, I think. It was still really stressful. Cambridge is really stressful, and I found that throughout. Maybe less so in my third year, actually. I think in my first and second year, at the beginning of the week, I would feel really chill. I'd have my supervision. Most of the time they went well. I mean, ups and downs, but I generally had really nice supervisors and enjoyed my supervisions and felt like they were really useful, and so I'd have my supervision. I'd generally feel good and be excited about all the work that I had to do for the rest of the week. I'd look forward to reading things on the reading list that I thought was interesting. By the end of the week, when my deadline was approaching and I felt like I didn't have enough time to get everything I wanted to done, which was always the case, and I had however many words left to write, it would just be so stressful and I'd be exhausted. Absolutely exhausted, and then I'd write my essay, get it in, have a shower, wash away all of the stresses, like a baptism almost, just to cleanse myself of that previous essay and move on to better things. In my third year, that kind of weekly routine broke down, so that wasn't so much of an issue. It was just more consistent work happening. Although I was still exhausted, I fell asleep all the time. Which may be an issue, it might be like iron deficiency or something, I need to actually get checked out, but I would just, I mean my friends knew me for this, I would just nap all the time. I'd fall asleep everywhere, on sofas, armchairs, at my desk. But then I was also hanging out with more, like, my friends and doing more things and writing for Varsity, which made it more fun. And when you're having fun, you can work better. If you're kind of depressed, then work is a lot, and work is so, it just feels overwhelming and you don't get so much done. If you're happy, you work better. That was like a revelation to me. If you're happy, you work better. So that's your most important thing, being happy. You can prioritise that about everything and your work ends up better. How crazy is that? I think my main issues in first year were the fact that I just tried to work and I didn't have balance. I didn't even attempt to try and get balance a lot of the time. If I had time to myself, I was so exhausted, I would just spend it by myself and watch telly and do colouring in. And like try and de-stress how I could, in like whatever way I could. I'd play the piano. That was so helpful. Piano was like my lifeline in first year. I would just like go down to a music room and play for a solid hour and like de-stress. My main things in first year, I was also kind of alone a lot of the time, and that's not healthy. I'm not an extrovert, but I'm not an introvert either, really. So I wasn't happy not being around people. I was a bit of a mess because I was so stressed. So I'd lose quite a lot of weight during term time. I'd go home, gain it again, because I'd be having food made for me. But I didn't think that making food was that important. I'd like, because I thought if I had work to do, then that came first, rather than like basic looking after yourself. Anyway, yeah, first year I was kind of stressed, imposter syndrome, not really looking after myself as well as I should have done, and struggling to get the work done, or at least I thought I was. I definitely was until midway through my second term of first year. Also, one thing that I really struggled with was supervision sometimes. One of my supervisors, in one of the first ever meetings I had with supervisors at Cambridge, said, "Oh, by the way, if supervisors don't mention something, that means you've done it well." Which basically meant that supervisions could be just a solid hour of criticism. And because it's history, they're one-to-one, so it would just be a solid hour of criticising you and your essay, the thing you've spent your whole effort and energy on for that week, just directed towards you and how, and the things that are wrong with it. Academics at Cambridge, I think, are notoriously bad at giving positive feedback. So you can go your whole term having supervisions constantly being told that what you're doing is lacking in structure, or you don't have enough knowledge, or your argument isn't strong, or you haven't been writing well enough, whatever. And then you get to the end of your term and the supervisor will tell you, yeah, so I reckon you're heading towards a high 2-1. And you're like, what? You've just been so mean to me this whole time. And the whole time I was heading towards a 2-1. Yeah, you're doing great. But it doesn't seem like you're doing great because everything they're telling you is criticism, because they're trying to help you get a first. But it just means that everything other than first class work feels not good enough. Sometimes, not always, it depends on your supervisor. Some supervisors, like my dissertation supervisor, gave me so much positive feedback. It was a breath of fresh air. She was so lovely. And my dissertation ended up the best piece of work I've ever done. It was my highest mark paper, and honestly the piece that I'm proud of more than anything else that I've ever done. And I got positive feedback on it. I was being told that I was good at what I was doing, whereas that was the exception that proved the rule, because a lot of the time at Cambridge you don't get positive feedback. You get your report summaries at the end of a term telling you what you're working towards and whether you're alright, but most of the time during term you're being told about all the things you're doing badly, which is extremely effective, and it means you make loads of progress and do great work towards the end, probably, maybe, but it can be really hard and it can be really tough to take. Just sitting there for an hour being told that your essay, one week it was, is moralistic, written like an A-level student, lacking in structure, lacking in argument. That was one of my worst weeks. So if you're terrible at dealing with criticism, you might struggle, honestly. I thought I was alright at taking criticism. I think I am generally, but it's tough when it's so relentless and it's so unbalanced. You're not getting the positive reinforcement at the same time. So I think that was tough in my first year especially. In my second year, especially in my second term, I worked really hard, and I was able to work hard because I was around people and I was a lot happier, and I would go to libraries and work in libraries, which to me was way better than working in my room. You need that separation, in my opinion. I needed that separation anyway. The sort of separation of your space and your workspace makes such a difference. And also I felt like such a Cambridge student in libraries. It would dispel all of this imposter syndrome. I'd walk around and be like, yeah, I belong here. Yeah, I'm at Cambridge University. Yeah, and I'm doing my work at Cambridge University. I'm reading these books. I'm like a Cambridge student. And in walking around the UL, sometimes my footsteps would echo, and I'd walk with a bit more of a swagger. Like all of these shelves of all of these books, and I was there to find books, and I was there to work, and I was a Cambridge student, and I really felt it in those moments. I also had a supervisor in my second term that I really wanted to impress. He was a bit of a big name, and I'd heard that he was a bit intimidating. So I worked really hard, and got positive feedback from him, and was so happy, and it just prompted me to work really hard to try and get that same response. And I did really well on his paper. Again, because I was just trying to impress him. So second year, I got a bit more on top of it, and I really enjoyed it. And I still was really stressed, because I still was putting lots of expectation on myself. But I think I had more fun. I got more out of it. I did more stuff for Varsity, which is a newspaper journalism thing. I decided I wanted to be a journalist, so I sort of did more stuff. I mean, in my first year, in my third term, I'd done a play and I did a comedy panel show with Footlights, and that was really fun. But I feel like in my second year I got more regularly stuck in with stuff, and I set up my blog, and I just hung around people more, and it was more fun. In my third year, it was COVID year, so various things got messed up. I had periods of isolation, and I mean, if you've seen my room tour, you'll know that my room was tiny, so that was horrendous. But also because of COVID, we lived in quite close-knit households, and that was really fun. Despite COVID, third year was my favourite year, by far. I felt like I knew what I was doing. I saw people a lot more. Not just in my household, but I'd meet up with other people outside my household, go on walks, COVID friendly, all of that. And I just really enjoyed the papers I was doing, because they were more specific. So in my part one, a lot, like the papers were kind of named by centuries and by geographical region. So you'd have, for example, paper 4, which was British politics from 1485 to 1688, and that was just the paper, and you could do whatever within that. In my third year, because they're part 2 papers, they're more designed about, like, around the specialisms of academics and the kind of things that they're interested in, and I ended up doing way more interesting papers. So I was doing my dissertation, which I obviously loved. That was on a cultural history of female hair in 19th century Britain. I did HAP, which is historiography, argument and practice. Everyone has to do that in third year. I did my topics on memory and time, so I was learning about the history of memory, the history of time, and how time and memory affects history and historians, like practice and historiography, and it's so interesting. And I also did a paper on, this was my favourite paper, it was called Man, Nature and the Supernatural, circa 1000 to 1500. So it was on like medieval religion and magic, and within that I studied like fairies and werewolves and saints and the cosmos in medieval. It was just so like indulgent, and I loved it, and I watched all the lectures and I went to all the classes and I just lapped it up. So much fun. And then the last paper that I did, and this made up 2 of my papers, so 2/5 of my degree, was what they call a special subject, and my paper was called The Transformation of Everyday Life in Post-War Britain. So from Britain from 1945 to 1990, and that was tricky. That was the thing that brought up the most challenges for me, I think, in my third year, because I do not do much modern history. The only modern history paper that I'd done in my part 1 was paper 23, The World History in 20th Century, and I hadn't got on with it that well. I'd liked my supervisor, some topics had gone well. In general though, I don't do much modern, like really modern history. The thing is though, so many history students do modern history and just do modern history, and are really good at modern history. So I was really aware, when I was in those classes, that this was not the kind of thing that I was used to, and it probably was the kind of thing that everybody else in that class was used to. I kind of assumed that they had way more knowledge of that kind of era than me, and just knew what they were doing and were probably just better at the paper than me. So, I mean, just like really intense imposter syndrome. And more specific and directed towards that class. And because it was a lot of the time over Zoom, if I said something stupid or something that I thought was stupid, I would just like turn my camera off and just like lie on my bed and be like, oh, I'm an idiot. Oh, everyone else is cleverer than me. Oh, I hate this paper. I hate it. Oh, and I just didn't think I was going to do well at it. To be fair, they were my lowest papers, but my lowest mark on them was still a 2-1. Like, I still did fine. I was right to not be as confident on that paper as the other papers, but also I was not right to stress out so much and think that I wasn't good enough at that paper, because I was. I got a mixture of firsts and 2-1s on as marks for those 2 papers. It was fine. I did fine, you know. But imposter syndrome is pernicious and persistent and crops up when you don't expect it, and it's kind of everywhere at Cambridge because everyone around you is so clever. So clever. Trying to sort of keep up with them is exhausting sometimes, especially if a lot of them have had a really good education and so don't just know about their subject or just about their papers. They have all of this extra outside knowledge, and they don't even necessarily actually do. Sometimes they just have a few pet subjects that they're really good at talking about and twisting conversation, so it turns out that you end up talking about them and then they seem really clever. The thing with interviews, right, is that they're like supervisions. So if you're good at supervisions, you're more likely to get into Cambridge. That is a theory, it's not necessarily true. But that means that a lot of people at Cambridge have a very specific skill. They're very good at pretending that they know lots of stuff that they don't actually know. And that can be really annoying. Hi! Yes, there has been a bit of an outfit change and a bit of a vibe change. And I was gonna, you know, just wear the same thing I was before and try to convince you that it didn't actually happen. But oh well, now I'm dressed as a snuggly bear, and that may or may not be because I ran out of time filming last time and suddenly had to leave and now pick up the pieces. But you can just deal with the continuity errors. Cool. What we were covering before. Cambridge can suck because it's stressful, Cambridge can suck because the workload is a lot, and because of imposter syndrome. There are a few other things that I wanted to talk about, but I feel like I've gone on a lot, so I'm just going to cover them very briefly. First of all, Cambridge can suck because it's very white and full of rich middle class people and quite a few upper class people as well, and so socially it feels quite skewed. It can suck if you're working class or even just not as middle class as the people around you, and not great for other things like social imposter syndrome and even just like getting along with people. Sometimes there have been like arguments I know in my friendship groups which are basically just like rooted in very different upbringings and backgrounds and people not understanding the other people in the group. Talking is different. Like I noticed that the pattern of talking and conversation was very different in Cambridge to back home, and like often it would be a lot more intellectual and about stuff I had no idea about, like obscure politics in the Middle East, and sometimes I'd find just like talking to people tiring because of that. And then you can get like imposter syndrome because you feel like you're not as clever as the people around you because they're talking about stuff that you have no idea about, when really you have a lot of knowledge yourself just about different things like Jane Austen novels or Barbie films. But yeah, another thing that can be difficult with Oxbridge is feeling like you have to make the most of it and like get your money's worth and do all the things that you feel like you should do at Cambridge. Like for example, I had always wanted to do stuff with the footlights, but I never did because I never put myself out there and did those kind of things because it was just scary and I didn't think I was good enough to do them. But then also, time is limited. You can't do everything that you want to do, and I did quite a lot. Like considering that almost half of my Cambridge degree was tarnished by coronavirus, I still managed to be a senior features editor for Varsity and write loads for Varsity and the Cambridge Student and do theatre reviews and go to impronaut workshops and do a play and a comedy panel show and go to the union and go to some debating workshops, and like, you know, there were loads of different things that I did. There are certain things where like imposter syndrome got in the way, like with wanting to do like more drama-y comedy things, and I just didn't do it. But also, like, you can't do everything, and if I had tried to do everything that I had originally wanted to do, I wouldn't have got as good as a degree as I did, and I would have been absolutely exhausted. So there's an extent to which you have to just cut your losses and say, I'm going to have a fun time, rather than tick off all of these things from my bucket list and like take advantage of all the opportunities that are coming my way, because there are so many opportunities. It's basically limitless. You can't fit it all in, and so you might end up regretting not doing all of the things that you decided you originally wanted to do, or feeling like you didn't make the most of your time at Cambridge. But there's only 8 weeks to a term, only 3 terms in a year, only 3 years if you're doing a course like I did. You might have more years depending on the courses you're doing, but you have a limited amount of time, and you have to balance your degree, your social life, and societies and extra thingies. And inevitably, you're not going to be able to constantly work at your degree and constantly be around your friends and do loads of society stuff. You're going to have a balance. And so I got a really good degree. I spent lots of time around my friends, especially towards the end, and I did some stuff. And that'll do. One other thing that sucks about Cambridge, you can meet people who know that they're really clever and think they're cleverer than you and try to like teach you things you already know. Can be kind of patronising and condescending. Some people like to tell people that do humanities subjects, or even just specific humanities subjects, it doesn't have to be from STEM students, that their degree is more difficult than yours. I've been at the brunt of this many times, and Anna has as well, that because it's kind of up to you how much work you do, people think that our degrees are easier, and you can kind of be belittled. Also, if you come across in a more kind of normal way, I guess, there's a danger that people won't take you seriously. And me and Anna, I think we've both found this, that sometimes you have to kind of, well, I felt like I had to try and prove myself that I was clever and as clever as the people around me. And that was partially imposter syndrome, and it was also partially because I felt like other people around me weren't taking me as seriously as I wanted to be taken. And what else did I want to say? Oh yeah, week 5 blues. Terms are 8 weeks, they're very intense. And the 5th week, there's a thing called week 5 blues. People around week 5 tend to get really depressed. and just sad and really burnt out. You're no longer at the beginning of term where you have all of this like new energy, and you're not at the end of the term where the end is in sight. You're just kind of in the middle of everything, and it just kind of feels never-ending and you're exhausted. I feel like if you get into a situation where it is common knowledge that everybody routinely burns out, then that might not be a great place to be. And Week 5 Blues is sort of testament to the fact that Cambridge is really stressful and everyone knows it, and that's just kind of part of the deal. The thing is, it doesn't have to be debilitatingly exhausting. It can be manageable, and there are lots of support systems in place, especially if you're at certain colleges with really good welfare systems. Basically, I don't want you to take this video as me saying that Cambridge is completely awful and you shouldn't go and you're just going to die of stress and your mental health is going to completely deteriorate. All I'm saying is that those things can happen. So be careful. Cambridge is a wonderful place. It's an amazing opportunity. I'm so glad I went, but it might not be for you. And I feel like I've covered a lot of the reasons now why it might not be for you. And so take the decision seriously, because if you're someone who already gets really stressed out about things, isn't great at managing their own time, isn't great at taking constructive criticism, and is already slightly falling apart at the seams, maybe consider whether somewhere as intense as Oxbridge is the right place for you, because it might be, it might not be, and that is your decision to make. But don't just think of Cambridge as like this dreamland where everyone just magically is a genius and then does all their work and then goes to a May ball and is like, wow, my life is complete. Okay, that is quite enough of me blabbing. Thanks for watching, and remember to like, comment, subscribe if you found this video helpful. Do leave some questions in the comments if you like, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye! Uncomfortable, come on. And as I said, I don't have a script, so this video might be a little bit of a mess. Yeah, blah, blah, blah.